Hello. Can everybody hear us? Can somebody just write in the little note on the side, just in the chat, to see if they can hear us okay? Yes, it will be good. Let's see. Hello, Haz. How are you? Marvellous. Thank you, B. We'll give it just another 30 seconds just to let a few more people join. How are you feeling, Clucky? You good? Not too nervous?
Good. Not too bad. Not too bad today, yeah.
Oh, good. I was just telling Clarky I had to come into London to get a decent connection because when we did a test for this, my Wi-Fi was horrific. I was like pixelated, but we looked like we're all good. Should we get started? What do you think?
Yeah.
Should we go?
Yeah.
So thanks for everybody that's listening now and anybody that's listening after the event. We thought it would be good as a part of our webinar series just to put together how to hire developers. So, but rather than just talking about it, if we can give you like a step-by-step guide for non-tech founders or non-tech folk that are in that process, we thought this could be quite helpful from speaking to a lot of founders that we've been speaking to over the last few months. Would you like to introduce yourself, Mr. Andy Clarke?
Yeah. So I'm Andy, or Clarky. I'm CTO and co-founder of Evidenced. We're building a platform to help people make better hiring decisions. So it's a platform that gives teams the tools to deliver consistent, fair, and measurable interviews driven by data. So if the key is in the name, we're looking for evidence-based hiring, so that you know that you're hiring the right person. Before this, I was a consultant CTO with one of my co-founders, Phil. We ran a consultancy for I think 3 or 4 years, helping teams scale, build products, but that also involves hiring, teaching teams how to hire, what they're looking for, evaluating the gaps that are missing in the teams, and then writing job specs to make that fit, and then subsequently hiring team members. And then before that, I was a CTO at a small startup called Tido. But yeah, I guess that's enough history for me. What about you, John?
I'm here at the Pioneers. So I'm looking after what we call recruitment as a service for startups as they're scaling and particularly within tech. For hires, and we're trying to help companies that don't necessarily have a function in their businesses at the moment, and then some companies that do have a function, trying to kind of like supercharge that, help them automate lots of processes, making things a lot more efficient. And so far so good. Things are going quite well, but we're at the point now where we are speaking to a lot of founders who are non-tech founders. They're going through, there's different stages. There are people who are looking for their first tech hire, so maybe a CTO, something like that. You also have other companies that are looking just to expand that team. So they may have hired their first tech hire, but they still need to be involved in the process and that they're still building that team out. Or they're a little bit further down the line, but they still like to be a part of the process within the hiring for techies. But I think one of the things would be good for us to help when we're talking about giving you like a hiring guide or a playbook or something. I think there's 4 key elements that we could probably go through today. So it's around defining what you're looking for, like the definition. There's how do you attract these people? How do you select them? And then how do you actually onboard them? And I think if we could start with defining, and obviously, Clarky, you've been doing this for a long time and helping lots of people do this. Where do you start? Where are people meant to start this process?
So I guess it depends on where the business is at, as you say. If you're looking for your first technical hire, so you are looking for maybe a founding member of the team, like a CTO co-founder, then what you're looking for is probably slightly different to if you've got an established team, or if you've maybe outsourced some of your initial MVP build to a third party. So I guess if we start with the CTO kind of co-founder, you're looking for someone that you can work with predominantly, and that you can understand, you can communicate with on a non-technical technical level, if that makes sense. So you have to be able to trust their level of expertise in the field, but also they need to be able to explain back what they're doing and how it relates back to the business. if you're say the sales or kind of marketing function. So there, it's a lot more about their ability to communicate and deal with kind of rapid changes in business rather than necessarily hands-on technical ability. However, if you're a founding member, you also need to be able to cut the code as well, right? So it's
What does cut the code mean for all us non-tech folk out there?
so building some software, building the app that you as a kind of non-technical founder have in your head. And I guess that's also that's one of the other things that I think people miss, is that as a founder, you know what you want, like you can see it, it's in your head. Articulating that to someone that's going to build it is something very different, and often that's a cause for frustration with between founding teams, or in amongst founding teams, is that the non-technical people know exactly what they want and the technical team aren't necessarily delivering. And this can be between a CTO and a CEO, or it could be between a single individual founder who's outsourced their build to an engineering software house. There's often disappointment in both of those relationships for the CEO because they're not getting what they want. And I think that's partly what this bit is all about. The defining bit is, what are you expecting after 3, 6, 12 months from that technical person or team?
So it's being very clear with the mission about what you're expecting from them in them first 3 months, 30, 60, 90 days, so to speak.
Yeah, exactly. But it's not, I mean, evidenced as a startup. What we're building is new, it's fresh. We're having to react and adapt to what we learn from the market. So I'm not saying that as a CEO or founder, you need to know exactly what you're going to build and define to the nth detail, I want a button here, I want a button there. It's about being able to articulate the journey that we're going to go on and the steps that we're going to go through to get there.
Okay.
And then it's up to the technical person to evaluate, okay, well, what do we build to kind of to facilitate that? What's the minimum that we need to build as quickly as possible to facilitate the learnings that you want to make as you go down that journey?
Okay. By the way, everybody listening, if there's anybody has any questions, feel free to just pop them in the bar on the side, and we'll answer them as well at any point. So if we're going back to like the actual, where do we start? The first thing is you need to understand what type of person you can work with, what type of skill set that person needs. Is that right?
Yeah. So it's I guess it's about gap analysis. So it depends on what the team is, the team structure that you have already. If you've got a single person who they're just a sales background, that's all they've ever done, you're probably going to want someone with some level of product or marketing, or like some understanding of kind of dealing with shipping products out to the world, not just building them. So that's a skill set that you might need. But actually, if one of the founders is a product person, then you might not need that. So then you can actually look more on a purely technical level for that first technical hire.
Yeah.
If you've got someone that's maybe a bit more design oriented in the founding team, you don't need an engineer who can do that. But often the engineer has to come up with the UI, UX, the whole thing, which is a very different proposition to just having someone who can write some back-end code.
Yeah. And how do you know, how do people define what they need from a technical perspective? If it was let's assume that you've now hired your CTO, right? Your first tech, or maybe your first tech hire, tech lead, or whatever it is. How do you align on the right stack here? Or is it purely down to the person that's within the organization here?
So, I mean, there's in a larger engineering function, you'll often find that teams talk about using the right tool for the right job. So they'll often have multiple different languages, multiple different databases. That at a very early stage is probably not the right approach. Standardizing on a very, very simple stack is going to be the easiest way to we'll probably talk about this later, onboard people, and B, it's far easier to iterate with a simpler stack. So, for example, Evidence is built purely on TypeScript. So we've got a single language throughout the stack. I'd highly recommend that for anybody that's starting afresh. Don't try and throw in any kind of super modern languages or kind of bleeding edge databases unless you absolutely need them.
Yeah, you've got to love. Has loves a bit of TypeScript by the looks of things. He's giving it some love.
Good.
So it's about and it's about standardizing the tech. But if you're somebody that's non-technical and you don't necessarily need to know how to program or to do this, but you'd probably want to have a bit of a base level understanding of how this type of technology would work. What's the rough parameters and barriers you might have, or what's the scope that this can allow you to achieve? Where could people go to, or where should people go to try and understand this a bit more?
That's a very good question. I think so. I've worked with people who, a product manager that I worked with, he decided to do a full Node.js course because we were moving towards using Node. This is years ago. We were moving towards using Node.js, and he wanted to understand why we were doing it and be able to challenge the engineering team on what they were doing. And I think that was healthy. He spent a lot of time doing that. Was that necessarily the right thing for him to be doing? Possibly. I've also known founders go through coding bootcamps, which is an extreme measure. Not I don't think for them to be able to build the product themselves. I think some of them started off thinking that, then they've realized, no, actually, maybe I can't do this myself, but it allows them to have enough knowledge to be able to feel their way through when chatting to engineers so that they don't feel like they're being stupid.
Yeah.
But I think there's a kind of an axis that I kind of look at, and one of them is autonomy and one of them is alignment. And so if you've got alignment and autonomy, that person you can trust. Like if you've got high alignment and high autonomy, like you can trust that person. If you don't have both of those, you're starting to move into, like, you want to check in more and more and more. You don't believe what's going on, and therefore then you'll start doing more training courses. And I think that's where this product manager that we worked with felt he was close to the trust but not quite. So he then felt like he had to learn more, and that wasn't his skill set. That's not what the business needed him to be doing, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Okay. And where now you start to think about, right, we're defining the type of person that we might need, that you may have been speaking to people about defining the tech, or you've done your research. How do you start to think about putting together the packages for tech staff? Because there's something that comes quite a lot, that the founding members of a tech team will feel like, well, you've got this wonderful idea, but you can't go and sell this idea, and the value is in the tech. So how do you create a fair package for people when they're the first few tech hires? Because they're going to be the ones that might help you get from C to Series A, and that's when to get you to that product market fit is going to be highly important.
Yeah, so I think at a certain point in any engineer's career, they will generally want to feel more autonomous. They want to have more ownership of more. So if you're at a big tech, you will generally have a very predefined box that you will sit in. That is, this is my area of expertise. You can dabble outside of this, but you will work in a very kind of a narrow field, but you'll be an expert in that very narrow field. As you join a smaller and smaller organization, you get to kind of touch and feel a lot more of the kind of the working parts. And so that is appealing to people at certain stages in their career, to be able to have that full autonomy of, blank sheet of paper, here you go and run with it. However, the flip side of that is that it's an opportunity to try all the new shiny things, right? So, and so this is what often we've seen catch people out, is that they'll bring on someone who's at that period in their career where they want to have all of this autonomy, but haven't necessarily got the maturity to know when to take those gambles on the bleeding edge technology, and when to just use bog standard, a pretty standard old school kind of well worn kind of technology to deliver what the business needs, not experiment with new tech.
Okay, well, that's good. And then would you say that there's any kind of standard practice when you're thinking about equity and options and schemes that people are putting together at this stage for these people, or is it really case by case basis?
So something that we've seen work well is giving an option giving a choice to once you've found the person that you think is right for the job, letting them choose their level of risk, because everybody's situation is different.
Of course.
So someone may have just started a family and may need a bit more cash in the bank now. Someone may be a bit more YOLOing it and just be like, yeah, I don't need any cash now. I'm happy living in a shared flat for the next couple of years, but I'm all in on this. There's not necessarily a right or a wrong.
No.
And I think
you would suggest keeping it open. Let's not pinpoint.
What we've done, evidenced, is provides the total remuneration, and then let the candidate take the equity proportion that they wish.
Okay.
And that seems to have, like, being open about, the more equity that you take, the more you're in this to some extent. And also potentially the more runway that gives us, because we've got more cash in the bank to be able to go a little bit longer. So it's being open about the stage of the business that we're at, and being open about their situation and what their needs are.
Yeah. Okay, that's good. I appreciate that. I think it's a good place to start. So we're kind of like defining the beginning of the process. So if we start looking at the job spec and then start going into the attraction, I think for me, the job spec has to be, there's some things that you really need that you can't do without, right? They must be able to do, at least be able to do some of the coding. They must be able to be aligned with your values, what you're trying to do, your mission, that type of stuff.
Yeah.
And then it starts to go into the attraction piece, I think. So once you've done that job spec, like I suppose it's the same question. Where do you start with attraction?
So for engineers, they're in high demand. So you're competing against hundreds of other startups that are in a similar situation, but you're also competing against established businesses that are in their Series A, Series B. They have a lot more money to throw around, and then you're also competing against the kind of the FANG companies. Although I'm not sure if that acronym works anymore, but you have to basically ignore them. You can't compete with them. So you're looking for a certain type of individual who is up for the challenge of a very small startup and believes in what you're doing. And that's probably the key part for all of this, is that you have to find an engineer that understands the problem that you're solving and believes that it's a worthwhile problem to be solved. Because generally, engineers are problem solvers. They enjoy being presented with a problem and solving it. That's what we enjoy doing. If you're presented with a problem that you don't believe is a problem or is worth solving, engineers will find hundreds of other things to go and do. And that involves playing with new shiny technology, and none of that is good for the business. So I think that's a key thing that you need to kind of establish very early on in this process, is that you're looking for someone that believes in the problem that you're solving. Beyond that, you have to, it's very basic things like presenting the salary. Not many job ads, these even now, present the salary or the range. Putting that up front can be a deal breaker for lots of candidates, and it saves everybody a lot of time if you know at least the minimum that you're willing to pay for this role. And then I guess you then need to just go and find people. So they're not going to find you generally. So it's about active sourcing, and I guess that's where you've got far more experience of this than me. you have to go and find people who probably weren't looking for a job because they're in a job solving fun problems, but your problem they didn't know about is now more interesting. And I think that's the thing.
But it's interesting you say that, because I think it touches on what we spoke about in our last webinar with Matt Tosin and Ollie. It was around storytelling in the recruitment process and how can you make that your competitive advantage?
Yep.
And it's all about your story now. Like, how can you allow people to see into your business? What are you really about?
Yep.
And I think that was so anybody who hasn't seen that, it'd be good to watch that one from from a couple of weeks ago. We've got a question from B here. B, would you like to join us on stage to ask your question? I know it's a bit out there. I don't know if you've got Sasha on your lap, but would you like to join or not? You can just say yes or no in the thing on the right hand side if you want to. Or B's not going to. What's she saying? Yes, here we go. Right, let's see if we can do this. Let's invite somebody on stage. There's B. Invite on stage. There we go. See if this works. This is fancy, isn't it? Did you get that, B? Oh, hello. Can you hear us, B?
I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. How fancy is this?
Yeah. Sorry, you've got me a bit disheveled, and I've got a baby to my right, but he's quiet at the minute.
Okay.
So, hi, Andy.
Hi.
Nice to meet you.
So, what's your question, B?
My question, I was just going back to a bit of the conversation that you had a couple of minutes ago, where you were talking about sort of the incentives for tech hires, and I was thinking particularly about if they're a first tech hire, and I really sort of emotionally, I like the idea that you would give people choice about the kind of reward package that they might like. Where it's your first tech hire, my question was, is it more important that at least some of their reward is a stake in the business? Because again, the conversation just before that was about how they go out building the tech, and you want to be careful about somebody coming in with a blank piece of paper and playing with all the fun tools that they might have at their disposal. And if they don't have a stake in the business, is there a risk that they play with all these fun tools, they build you something, and then they get bored, and actually there's no real incentive for them to stay? And there might be fault on both sides there, but how important is equity to get somebody to really stick with you for the journey? Because everybody who's been involved in startups knows there's lots of ups and downs.
Yeah, that's a valid point. I think so. What we've done is set a minimum, so you have to take an element of sacrifice as equity, and so that's what we did. It wasn't a huge amount. It was because we didn't want to rule people out who needed, whose lifestyles are, they can't take the risks that some other engineers might be able to. But I mean, generally, if you've got a stake in the business, does it change the way that you make decisions as an engineer? I'd like to think so. I think once you get your head into the problem, generally those outside influences are ignored. I don't think I've ever thought, I'm not going to write this if statement because I've got this amount of equity in a business or anything like that. So I think high level, yes, it probably does change. And I think it probably makes bigger changes at the kind of team discussion level around road mapping and things like that of, what is the most important thing that we can build right now that's going to change this metric over here, which is nothing to do with engineering in some regards. And so being able to contribute to those conversations from a stakeholder, someone who has a skin in the game, it does change some of those discussions. Yeah.
Does that answer your question, B?
It does. I have a follow-up one.
Go for it.
Which was just on the conversation that you got to just now. Sorry, my mind went blank for a minute. When you're looking to go out and seek tech hires, so you're actively sourcing, I'm a complete non-techie and I've never actually recruited a tech person either. How important is it that they are currently doing a role or have done a role that's technically similar to what you are sourcing for? So might you go to your direct competitors, or should they be building a product that is in some way functionally similar to what you're going to be asking them to build here? So that was sort of my follow-up question. And I might just take stage right as Sasha's
Okay.
starting to make
Thanks,
that's the question.
Thank you.
Domain experience is useful. I think throughout my career, I've drastically changed the domain that I've worked in, from telco to a music startup to a retail platform, a Bitcoin mining farm, to now an interviewing platform. The domain experience was, it grew on me, but that's what you're leaning on the other founding members for. That's who, the CEO is, or the salespeople, or the product person. That's their level of expertise. And so then it's about, okay, well, how well do they communicate with the engineering team? And, do the engineers understand, can they understand the domain quickly enough, without it being a blocker? So
I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, so I think the TLDR is, yes, domain experience is useful, but generally, you're looking for these people to be technical experts, and for their ability to convert problems presented to them in the domain language into useful bits of software. Now, so I guess during the interview process, you're looking for examples of where they've done that, and how they've gone about finding out those bits of domain knowledge that they don't have. So, for example, at Tito, where the music startup, I have actually played musical instruments in the past in my childhood, and still play guitar now and piano. But throughout my first 2 or 3 months, nobody knew that I had any musical knowledge, because I was asking all of the really dumb questions on a domain level to help me understand, is my elementary musical knowledge what these high level musicians understand. There was a surreal moment where I suddenly sat down at the piano and started playing stuff, and everyone was quite shocked at, oh, you do know about music. So it's that ability to be able to dig into someone else's knowledge to get the information that I needed to be able to convert that into a solution to a problem that was presented.
It looks like B's happy with that answer. Thanks for that. You can pat yourself on the back. Got that one there. So just looping back to the attraction part of it. Obviously, we're working with quite a lot of companies that are going through this scale. And for context, there was an organisation we worked with that were moving from being outsourced to then coming in-house. And that was quite a challenging thing to do. And it's, how do you attract those people into an organization when there is no tech lead? You're going to be taking on the tech that somebody else has already done.
Mm-hmm.
And that can be quite unattractive for a developer. Would you agree? Your experience?
It depends.
Okay.
So I often relish those challenges of being presented with some code that's not working correctly necessarily. So a bug, here you go, here's a bug, and it's a bit of software that I've never seen before. And, I talk about peeling back the layers and digging in and really trying to find, where it's going wrong. And a previous company we worked at, I think Phil said something about, someone said, oh, that's a bit of a black box to me. And Phil said, well, I think we're just going to have to turn the light on in that box. We're going to go and have a look. We're going to make that box a bit grayer or something. It's the ability to be able to dig and to find the root cause of a problem is a essential trait for an engineer, because we leverage third-party packages all the time anyway. So we leverage open source packages, and they generally work, but often they don't. And it's being able to work out why, and you're looking at someone else's code straight away, and it's someone else's code that they may have written 5 years ago and haven't updated, and there's forks left, right, and center of these different versions, and you've got to try and work out, okay, well, you know, where's it working, where isn't it working? And then as soon as you start to grow the team, you've got multiple people writing code on the same bit of software anyway. You're looking at other people's codes on a daily basis.
Yeah.
There's no getting away from, you know, dealing with other engineers' code. And I think that's why boot camps these days they're all around kind of group learning, kind of pairing, and that's something that we'll come to this again in the onboarding, but is never leave an engineer on their own. Always give them some. If you haven't got the budget to hire 2 engineers, hire one and find them a mentor or find them a network outside of your business that they can, you know, post ideas and questions to, and that's how you learn and you get kind of outside input from someone who may not have the domain knowledge still. Again, it's asking those really dumb questions that would just challenge the person that's in your team to, you know, question themselves or, you know, think twice about what they're doing or come up with another creative way of doing something.
Yeah. And where do you find these people? Where should people start to look? I think because I think that's a good thing. So we've built in a way through this process, we've built a bit of a persona of the type of people or person that we're individually looking for or collectively. And now we have to go out there. Where do they start to look? Do they use, like, is there tools they use? Do they have to go and use agencies and spend a lot of money? But typically people at this stage aren't having that money to be able to spend on this type of stuff. Where do they go?
If you haven't got a network of engineers yourself that you can lean on, then it's going to be really, really hard and probably expensive to go and find them. I think there's no real getting away from that. And the expense is either cash, you pay a recruitment agency to go and do that for you, and they're going to charge you what? I mean, I don't know,
A lot.
15-20% maybe. So then, you know, that's a lot of cash to put on the table for someone, you know, who's just helping you find them, or you're going to spend the time yourself doing it. And I've seen founders do this, you know, trawling LinkedIn, going to meetups themselves, you know, talking to people. That's a lot of time that you're not spent on your core role as, you know, champion for this new idea that you're building, you know, going raising, you know, could that time be spent better going and raising money or, you know, selling a product that doesn't exist yet, or, you know, mocking up wireframes for ideas and that sort of thing. So there is a cost there regardless. So I think people try and shirk away from using recruitment agencies more than they possibly should, because there's a huge value in them finding you a set of candidates that you can pick from, and if you get to work with someone who's really good, you'll learn, you know, they'll get to know you and they'll be able to sell, which is part of the problem in a kind of high demand market such as engineering. You have to sell your idea to them, and so actually finding an agency that can do that for you and be your representative, because it's the first point of contact often that they will have ever heard of you, because you're an unknown startup coming out of nowhere. How do you're not a known brand. They have no idea who you are.
Yeah.
And so that first contact has to be, you know, full on pitch. You know, this is your dream job and you're the right person for this role because of X, Y, and Z, right? So
But to be mindful on that, the one watch out I would say about when using an agency in this space is that, remember, they're incentivized by the commission that you're paying them.
Yeah.
So you just have to keep one eye out for whether or not this is actually the right person for you right now, or is it because this is the person they have for you right now? Yeah. So I think that's important.
But so I think that's why it loops back into being clear up front as to what it is that you're looking for.
Exactly.
You know, just because an agency has this person on their books who's available now doesn't mean that they're the right person for you.
Exactly.
And being strict on, you know, evaluating the key criteria that you need, and and then being a bit looser on the ones that are kind of nice to haves.
Exactly.
That's where you can make the trade-offs, but don't fall short on those kind of key competencies that you need.
Yeah, and I think one of the tips that I would give if you're a founder or somebody that's in the position of hiring for this role very early on, and you don't have the budget, try to lean on people that you're in communities with. You know, if you're in Slack communities, if you're I don't know, in an accelerator or something like this, try and network around to find potential places to find this. Like, I know that there's a group that you're a part of. I mean, there's a lot of stuff for like CTOs and stuff like this.
Yeah.
So try and tap into those types of networks as well if you can. And I think networking at the very, very early stages is really important.
Yeah.
I think your point, it quite naturally takes it onto the selection area, and it starts talking about that candidate journey. So once they're in process with you, how do you create a nice, seamless journey for this person? Because what we're seeing at the moment is that people in the tech space in particular can be in up to 15 processes at a time.
Yeah.
It's crazy for people to keep on top of this, which clearly they're not on top of every process. And I think whichever journey is the best is going to keep them the most engaged. So I just wondered if you've got any tips around that.
Yeah, I think having a clearly defined, structured process up front helps in more ways than one. For internally yourself, if you're running a structured process, you know that you're giving every candidate the same fair shot at getting through that process. For the candidate, you can be very upfront about exactly what they're going to have to do and what's expected of them during the process. So that's kind of the number of interviews, who they're going to be talking to, and how long those are going to be. And actually, once you write it down, often businesses look at that and then start to question, well, hang on a minute. So we're asking candidates to spend 7 hours with 4 different individuals. That's a lot of time. And also we're giving them a take-home tech test, which is 2 hours. And you know, when you start to look at it all stacked up in one long process, you realize kind of how much effort you're asking the candidate to go through. And if, as you say, they're in 15 different loops, you know, they can get one of these jobs that's as fun as your job for 2 hours of effort or 3 hours of effort. Why would they bother spending all of that time with you?
And then we start going into the whole culture stuff, which is a whole nother topic that I think we can cover another time. But yeah, I 100% agree with you.
So it's about working out exactly how you're going to assess the competencies that you have identified previously. So is that conflict management? Is it dealing with risk? Is it being able to deal with outages in production, shipping things into production, all that sort of stuff? What is the most important set of criteria that you've got? And then working out exactly how you're going to evaluate those as quickly as possible with as minimal effort from everybody. Because don't forget, you're asking the candidate to go through 7 hours of process. If you're an individual founder, are you going to spend 7 hours evaluating every single candidate? Or actually, do you know what, when you get to the end of the process for the first one, you're just going to say yes, because you don't want to do that ever again. And so it's making it as short as possible, but whilst also evaluating all of those things that you need. And I think for an engineering first hire, you can probably get it down to maybe 3 hours at a push. You're looking for, can they code? And then the rest of it is all about behavioral stuff. And can they code? Some level of system design, so high level architecture pieces, and then the behavioral stuff. And I'd say the split for those would probably be about 50-50. So code and system design with 50% behavioral.
So as a founder, we could probably work ways around assessing the behavioral, the soft skills, and this type of stuff. There's a lot of stuff out there, from psychometrics to stuff like Cambridge Code, and there's a whole host of stuff out there. But I don't even think it's a how. I don't think you can expect a non-tech founder to assess a tech person and you do need to find some external support somewhere to be able to assess these things, right? Would you agree?
Yes and no. I think is so. If you're leaning on your network and someone is coming through your network, their technical ability you can evaluate somewhat through a referral. And again, I don't think I've ever known an engineer take on a job that they didn't think that they were technically competent for.
Yeah.
Often it's about the behaviors not aligning. That's where things go wrong almost 90% of the time. It's not about their ability to actually cut the code or build something. It's about how they managed when it didn't go right, how they managed when new things were thrown at them instead. And I guess those are in some way linked. If you build a piece of software that's very unique and not very easy to be changed, then that is difficult to iterate on, and that will then lead to friction when the CEO decides we're going to pivot after 6 months.
Yeah.
But all of those things can be, I guess, investigated and dug at through a series of behavioral interviews around past experiences. And this is something that I don't think we've really touched on, is the kind of the criteria for someone is years of experience isn't really enough, but what we look for is breadth and depth of experience. So have they used multiple different technologies and learned from the pros and cons of using those different technologies, but also have they worked on something for an established extended period of time? So, have they made technical choices and then had to live with those technical choices for a period of time to know, that I will guarantee those technical choices will have been wrong at some point. So how have they got out of those situations? If they've got out of those situations by getting a new job, that's not the sort of person that you probably want on your team. You want someone who's been able to adapt and kind of live with those choices.
And what you're talking about here, living with those choices, is have they stayed beyond not necessarily years of experience, but within that organization to, like, how long would you say they would have had to have lived, like, would they have had to live with those to show that they've lived with those choices?
It depends on the organization and the build and the product.
Or is there a watch out that you should be looking, like there's some red flags that somebody here could look at and see if you think,
I think if you're looking for your first technical hire, a serial contractor who's moved from job to job every 3-6 months, is not going to have had that experience of living with those decisions. So you're looking for someone who's been at somewhere, it can be on a contract, it can be on a permanent role, but someone that has been somewhere for probably at least, I'd say at least 18 months to get enough feedback points from the business that something's not right and be able to adapt and change and move on from that. And that's probably, 12 months in the same team in a single organization.
Yeah. And I think one of the, I'm quite conscious of our time and stuff. I mean, we could go on about this for hours, but just in terms of aligning that things and people can take away, if we just really briefly touch on, if you can, how you're referring to structured interviews. And I think what we're trying to say here is, if you have a skill set that you're looking for, you need to really know, like, what are the key things you're looking for. So there's 5 to 7 skills, and then you start having to look at what questions do you need to ask, or how can you assess for those individual skills. And then depending on the answers for those individual skills, that should have a weighting, or it should have a kind of score matrix in a way, right? And then from that, at the end of the process, you can really start to see how well they do. I'm not necessarily talking about comparing candidates, because I don't know if that's enough people in a process for that to be effective, but definitely for your own peace of mind, you're kind of like having a data point on this rather than just having that gut feel, right? Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably approach this in a slightly different or in a very engineering point of view. When we're evaluating a technology choice, so should we pick TypeScript or Java or C# for our back-end language, you'll write down pros and cons. You'll know what the benefits are of each. You'll know what the downsides are of each, and there's always a trade-off. You're making a choice of, I'm willing to sacrifice A over B. When you're hiring, you're doing the same thing. Nobody is perfect, and anyone that comes through the door will have huge benefits on one side, and then they'll maybe have some downsides, and whether that's a level of experience or is it a certain behavioral trait that you've established during the interview process. At least if you've got evidence of those different parts throughout the interview, you can start to look at, okay, well, I can see where this candidate is strong and I can see where they're not so strong. And you can then make an informed decision as to whether this candidate is right to join the organization now. And I think especially when you're in the early stage of a business, people are desperate to just get going. I just need someone now. I just need the product built now. This person will do. And actually, be patient. There will be someone that comes along with enough of the good stuff that you're looking for.
But what was the thing you said to me when we were prepping for this? I'm pretty sure you gave a number that, there was a recent study into I'm putting you on the spot now to see if you can remember the actual cost of a bad hire. There was a new study on that, right?
So I'm not sure. I can't quite remember. I don't think it was a couple of years ago, but it was a study by I think it's the REC, not the car people. REC.
It's the
hire a mid-level manager. So this obviously doesn't really apply to startups per se, or early stage businesses per se, but a mid-level manager on a 50k salary, the cost to the business of a bad hire was around about 140k. So that's the cost of bringing them in, onboarding them, finding a replacement, because you have to, that role is now empty because, and then it's also the collateral damage of what that negative impact, the morale, the loss of productivity because of that hire has cost the business overall.
And so this is what we're saying. Slowing down can be good in this situation to think about. And on that, something I was discussing with Matt a couple of weeks ago, or I can't remember, was when you're hiring for someone, you need to be quite flexible on that job spec. Yes, there are some things that they must be able to do, but like you said, it's the contextual piece. It's actually, they're not quite what we were looking for, but they have this whole other skill set. So maybe we could still hire them to do this, this, and this, because we don't have that in our arsenal at the moment in terms of our team. And then in the next hire that we do, maybe this person we can hire for those particular skills. So they would be the things that you couldn't, no longer be able to adjust to, right?
Yeah, exactly.
I think that's a good point. Yeah. Right. Shall we go on to our final part, which is about onboarding?
Yeah.
So I think we all know, I mean, in terms of the whole hiring process, onboarding is, I think, one of the things that all startups are crying out for help with, because everybody's got their own way of doing it. Different people think it starts at different points. I think we were talking about how it doesn't just start when somebody's signed a contract. You're onboarding someone from the moment you're putting that, like from the moment they're reading your job spec, that is where the onboarding started.
Yeah,
right?
That's where their expectations are starting to be set.
Exactly. And then if we do go, I mean, just because of the time we've got, if we do look at what people are traditionally thinking of from the moment somebody signed a contract onwards, what are the biggest mistakes do you think that companies do at this stage? Do you have anything that people should try and avoid?
So I think depending on notice periods, it can be a 3-month lead time to someone joining. And I think people often just think, well, I'm guaranteed to, this person is guaranteed to start in 3 months' time. Unfortunately, that's not the case. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not quite sure what the consequences are of backing out of employment contracts at that early stage. But they're going to be approached over the next 3 months by another 100 startups offering similar jobs, doing similar things, or kind of different worlds. And so you have to keep them engaged in what you're doing without asking them to do much, because, you know, they're not getting paid to do stuff, although you may be able to find some time for them and pay them for some time to come on board. We were fortunate that our latest hire was able to work for half a day a week. His current employer was fine with that, so we paid him for half a day a week, and it got him up to speed before he kind of came in. And then day one wasn't day one anymore; it was, you know, day 4 or 5, because he's done some of the prep work already. He's got his laptop, he's got himself set up. That day one is then right. I'm straight in. I'm fully on board. There was no kind of day one, hi, meet everybody. Everybody was already met.
I do think there's something in that day one, though. I think there's a really interesting book called The Power of Moments. I think it's the Heath brothers. I don't know if you've seen it, but they're talking about the peaks, troughs, the transitions, and then it's also people will remember the highest point of their point in the company, and then the lowest point in the company, and that's basically how they're judging their experiences, right? I was talking about this the other day. I've probably really made a hash of what the reality of that is, but the big takeaway from that is that day one is it's their first impression of their business. That's such a significant thing for them. And I think it's right. If you can start to slowly onboard people by maybe inviting them to 1 or 2 events, if there's an office event, or if you're doing something, or like you said, if there's a way you could pay for them to come in, that anxiety starts to reduce. Joining a new company is a big thing, no matter how big it is. There's a lot of unknowns. So I think if you can find a way to realign on the journey, so you know the 4 sources, the 4 sources of purpose, so around Matt's gonna kill me if I get this wrong. It's mission, values, craft, and vocation. And it's, if you can realign them all about this process again, because you know they might miss these type of things when they're in the process, so that they're very aligned about where you are, where you're going, this type of stuff, and you give them a really personalized, unique experience that's going to stick with them, and then that kind of like sets the expectation, and they'll feel like that has been a very well thought out way of they want people to join us, right? So if there is maybe in the second week it hasn't quite gone to plan, they know that they've done the first part, and they've you know, there's some trust there that the next part that they're going to build will be even better for the next person. So I think that's quite important to focus on that. And the other point was just about how much can you expect people to do when they're not being paid in this situation? And I don't think you can really expect people to be doing a little bit of code here, a little bit of code out of it, when I don't think that's right. Would you agree?
No, I 100% agree. I think people should be paid for their time. I think it comes back to somewhat, in some ways, B's question, that maybe if they've got skin in the game, they're going to be more inclined to get a bit more involved earlier than perhaps if it was just a contract-based role. But I think from an onboarding point of view, and it depends again on the size of the team, but our number one rule is never leave someone on their own. So the larger organizations will have kind of buddy systems and that sort of thing. But just having daily, almost, you know, hourly catch-ups on the first day is what you need. And especially if, you know, in a remote world that we're now kind of moving back into again, how do you facilitate that through the likes of Slack and kind of Hangouts and all those sorts of things? It's not easy, but you have to basically make it as open and as informal as possible. I know one organization tried to basically set up a back-to-back meeting for the candidate on day one to kind of meet everybody, which is it's a great idea because that's what they do in the office. But actually, that's now become super intense on a VC. You know, there's no way of kind of going for a coffee. You know, it's not the same as just going for a walk and going into the kitchen and meeting someone and having a bit of a chat. And it feels very forced and structured. So something that I've done the flip of is basically say to the team, just create a Hangouts and make yourself available when they want to have a chat and come and meet you and ask you questions. So it's kind of turning it on its head so that it's not forced, but it's more of a pull than a push.
Yeah.
And I think something that organizations don't do particularly well is iterate on their onboarding process. So use every new starter as a way of stress testing your onboarding process. Engineering teams often have readmes explaining kind of how to set things up and that sort of stuff. It's almost always out of date when the next person joins. So getting them to find the bits that aren't working and updating the documentation to better represent what it is now. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to make it better for the next person coming in. And it gets them involved in the process as well. It's then, they're then committing to the repository. They're getting their hands dirty from day one. There may be some setup of kind of adding themselves to a set of user lists somewhere. Maybe that's a commit, maybe that's a deployment. It depends on the setup, but there's ways of getting them involved with it being very low risk, and they're still kind of, they're actually shipping something on day one. And that satisfaction of you've joined a team, you've met a bunch of people, and you've already shipped something on day one is pretty, it's pretty satisfying.
You feel like you've made impact straight away. Yeah.
I mean, if you join a large enterprise, I've often known, in fact, a friend of mine joined he's in investment management, completely different world, but he joined a company and he didn't get a laptop for 2 weeks. And so,
but they're the things, right? They're the things that you have to be very careful about. It's the laptops. It's have people. Is there a way that you could just have a form that people fill in one document and that automatically sends them a bunch of documents to sign, your contract, your new starter form, and with all those details that can automatically then go off to who it needs to go to, get you set up on payroll. And I think that's where, if you can keep automating a lot of this stuff as you're scaling, it makes so much difference for you as an employer, and also for the candidate experience, because that's so seamless, rather than waiting, not having your contract signed after 2 months and not knowing what's going on, that type of stuff. And making sure that people know exactly when's payday, how do I book holiday, like all these little things. But I think you can do that before the person's coming, or at least give them access to somewhere where they can go through this at their own pace and very easy to find. This is good. I think we've almost run out of time. We covered a lot. I really wanted to go really deep into some topics. I hope we have. I hope we've managed to help people with some form of takeaways. But for you, Andy, what would you say are the 3 key things that people should take away from this if they're about
3 key things? I think there's non-technical people put a lot of emphasis on an engineer being able to cut code, that being the primary skill that you're looking for. I'd say it's only half, and possibly not even half for that first initial hire. Most of what you're looking for is going to be in behavioral elements. So can they work with the team? Can they deal with conflict? Can they deal with making very quick, snappy decisions that may make or break the business? Can they deal with fighting fires in production? Because if they're the only person that's cutting code, they need to be able to put the fires out that they may have started. But it's being able to evaluate those behavioral things is something that non-technical people can do. And then it's just about the coding elements. And you have to lean on your network of trusted people to be able to evaluate those for you.
Yeah. I think this is I've really enjoyed speaking, Andy. And I think something that you said that's really stuck with me from this is, once somebody's joined or they're here, don't leave them alone. Just be with them. And I think that goes throughout the whole process. You've got to nurture people through the process and make them feel that this is you're really serious about them. And the more you can do that, the more personalized it is. I think that goes a long way. I don't know if anybody has any questions. Feel free to pop up on the right. I'll give it 5 seconds if anybody wants to write something. And if not, I'm just going to pop this up here. Oh yeah, B's put something. Oh no, somebody's put something up here. So this is our People OS playbook. So if anybody's interested in how you could build these types of processes out, there's a lovely little guide there. And then we also I'll just explain a little bit about what we do. If anybody's interested in, there's Matt walking past trying to distract me as I'm getting to the end of this. So yeah, if anybody that's interested in doing this, anybody wants any advice, we're happy to talk about it. You can go to thepioneers.co.uk, and effectively what we do, we're like a digital agency that help builds tech for people operations. So we try and make your life as easy as possible from a tech perspective, so that you can focus on actually looking after your people from a culture way. So yeah, I've really enjoyed that. Thanks for joining us, Andy, and thanks to everyone that's watched or is going to watch this afterwards. We hope you enjoyed it and hope it's been helpful. Thanks a lot. We'll see you soon.
Cheers, John.
Bye.